It was some galleries in one street in Mitte, like Eigen und Art, Nogger Riemschneider, Kalle Gebauer, which are today all very famous galleries. But at that time they were all together. You only went there at an evening and you met everybody. Today it's a scene which is very diverse, and you have so many different people and also American artists somewhere doing something, which is also great. I think it's good that it didn't stay like this. It couldn't stay like this. It was a very special moment. You open like you go into a room which was kind of not discovered, and you open it and you start to do something. Yeah.
Send on to Klaus, and maybe he can share his journey immediately after this conversation from both of you all. Yeah.
Okay, hello everybody. As Eric was living in Berlin at those times, I was, after I studied in Düsseldorf and I worked as an artist for some time in Düsseldorf there. Also I was running as a curator at Castle on the Lower Rhine. I moved to the Netherlands, very close to the German border, and I was looking from outside Germany, all this moving, the moving from Cologne and Düsseldorf to Berlin, and also the political structure which was moving from the western part from Germany to the eastern in Berlin, which has also a cultural impact on the whole society in a way, because in the early 2000s and the late 90s, for instance, the art relevance of the West was completely, I would say, not really existent in a way. And many artists were thinking about leaving the West. Okay, like this. Were thinking about leaving the western part of Germany and go for Berlin and start something completely new with other new people. There are not that, let's say, historical traditions from the West that were existing. There was an academy there in Berlin, but it was not as influential as the Düsseldorf Academy or now the Frankfurt Academy is. So this was a completely open thing. And in opposite to this movings in the art world, there were also new approaches in politics about new thinking. What is German? What is real German? And what would you consider is German, and how German you have to be to consider yourself as a German. So all these migrant things, which started in the early 60s in Germany, where I was very young, like 6, 7 years, next to a big factory. I saw the first generation migrants and foreign workers, mostly from Turkey, who made up a completely new culture in Germany. First sight, just as guests, they felt themselves as guests, but they also were treated as guests, not even so nicely as they maybe expected when they were leaving their country. But there was developing a special culture in Germany, which has an influence on architecture, on selling foods, on eating food products, which was, I would say, the food habits were completely changing since the early 60s. They also would change anyway, but this Turkish influential, for instance, was a big thing. And also the structure, how neighborhoods were organized, and the interfering between student areas and Turkish areas was something which, as an art student, was quite obvious that you deal with it, and also as a artist, normally you have to deal, if you have a studio, with a karate studio and a mosque, and maybe a shop next to a mosque, and then is your studio. Also made works about mosques and this kind of suburb situation which were developing since the, I would say, early 80s, mid 80s. So this was, in a way, why I tried to stage as a sort of interior object this situation from the 90s, what is German and what is not, in a sculpture. I mean, I took lessons from Joseph Beuys in the last 4 years of his life, from 1982 to 86, and I'm also a friend with his major Johannes Stüttgen, who is still having lectures about Joseph Beuys and his life work. So I also made a social sculpture bar about Joseph Beuys 20 years ago, I think. So putting all these things together, the social structure of Germany, thinking about what could art could do in society and in a social or in an art space, and how can I interact with the public, and what kind of theories and strategies I can use. I decide to use furniture or interior situation as a symbol of a inner space, of society, something which is outside, but it's established in an inner space where I can experience and make a sort of lab setup with a sculpture, and I call it social sculpturing, and I could put in all the topics whatever I like, and try to stage this in an open space like a gallery, a museum, or a real open space, or something I did like with the German football team in Brazil, for instance, with also a social sculpture about German history, which actually took place from 1954 with the Wunder of Bern, the Wonder from Bern, where we got the first championship, soccer championship, which was also a proper excuse for the bad history, I would say, and that also was a thing that I found football is interesting, but this was only a sidekick. But what I tried to do there was also to bring in the new situation in Germany after the wall fall down, because the German East was totally architecture almost empty, because all the old buildings were not in a very good condition or were just falling down, and there was, you have to make a decision, should you save it, like in Dresden, the Frauenkirche, or just put it down, or what do you do? And what I was visiting when I worked as an art shipper for 2 years, I was driving like thousands of kilometers also in the east. I saw that this typical structure, motorway, and then Aldi market, and another market, and another, and the Burger King and the McDonald's drive-in was a typical structure beside the old cities, which became now sort of new Germany in the old Eastern Germany. So the idea was then to put this together. I mean, the moving from the western part to Berlin, and also the new frontier. So I tried to drive by car 5,500 kilometers with my car, and I make pictures from every city round this way, where I've tried to find Burger Kings or drive-ins from McDonald's or this kind of dinner things. And this is also on the bar, let's say the line from the German frontier, from the new German frontier since 1990, I think, yeah. So and I put this together with a video. I mean, I used the 3 symbols, the half moon for this Islamic thing, but also as a comment on the Potsdamer Platz, the architecture there. And also I used this McDonald's sign as a typical sign for that, the color, and as a typical image of this kind of approach from bigger companies, and the cross, which I turned down and used it just to bring in beer there or other things which are useful. Okay, and this together I mixed in the movie with a sort of inner dialogue from my videos and film scenes I like to mention.
Thanks, Klaus and Eric, both. I think what is nice is to get a sense of the changing times which sort of move into your lives and move into the work that we are seeing here, and obviously in the work that follows subsequently. And I think this is something that we can discuss more. The other very important thing, and I've personally always argued that the interior, we have this classic sort of the 19th century imagination of dividing the public and the private. But in both your discussions of the interior, the public and the suburban and the outside has sort of been there to shape what we would then physically call the interior. And I think this sense is quite important for us to hold on to. And maybe at this point, Shilpa, I could invite you with two things that you could discuss or throw light upon. One is, since we are talking of the shape of 1990s, I think, you know, not just in a sense of the German and the Indian context, but we know why the 1990s have been so crucial, dynamic, confusion very often, but it's also the time when the art scene sort of emerges. There are certain sort of steps taken in the production of what we see as works of art, but also your work has constantly played on certain questions of the public and the political. So if you could talk a little bit about both these aspects.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, a couple of things. So yes, I think, well, I mean, for now what I'm thinking is, yes, the 1990s being here in Bombay, I went to the art school 1992, 97, right here, 10 minutes ago, away at JJ. But it was, so it's interesting to think as at some point practices are associated with a given time, but the time need not be just arrested in that particular decade, but can actually move back and forth. So to come back to this show sort of being 20 years ago, or an artist sort of placing a cross and a McDonald and a symbol, a crescent at the same point in a particular place, which then of course the show travels, and then 1992 taking place in Bombay, also a site which is a city which is drawing people from all over, a city of opportunity, therefore a city which is constantly dealing with several claims. There's therefore a rise of the right, who makes over a particular time multiple claims, and there's a sense of exclusion therefore of those who possibly come from, who they think those who do not belong and therefore come from the outside, which then perhaps, but that's within, I mean, the idea of the nation state therefore also being in flux, because the nation would imagine everyone to be a unit, but within a metropolis you would have the so-called group which would think of themselves as local versus they might think of them as outsiders. And so this sense of multiple claims, the multiple change, to grow up in a city where almost every person you meet is coming from a place elsewhere. You know, this is a place Bombay is about. I mean, of course, it's a city which also got renamed in 1995, yeah? So also you can see it's struggling with itself. It's struggling with this claim. So, yeah, I mean, it is, I mean, so I come from a generation which now sort of 20 years down the line, I mean, the first time I showed was 1995 in a show, is now in retrospective. I mean, at this point, because in 20 years you might look at it as else differently, but is looked upon as a moment of change and rupture, say, versus the practices of, say, the 80s, which was slightly more quieter in this region. It was also a moment where 1992 you had Manmohan Singh open up the nation state, liberalization came in. It was a moment where internet streamed onto your desktop. it was also, I grew up on black and white TV. You know, on black and white TV to VHS to internet was very quick, and it was barely like how many years? In the 80s we had the TV, Asiad Games. First color TV, yeah? That's, and exactly, yes. And so it was, I mean, in this part of the world, it was a moment where things were changing very, very quickly. And perhaps that also had something to do with my generation, which then did not feel really hesitant, you know. There was always a huge question of the local versus the global, but there was suddenly a great comfort level in the local, in yourself, which allowed you to sort of look at your immediate, which was necessarily not entrenched in deep tradition. I mean, your immediate was the city, which was which is changing like very, very quickly. So there was therefore a sense of risk, a sense of freedom in that. And that, I think, marked the 1990s. And at the same time, while that was happening, you also had the sectarian violence take place. That created a sense of urgency in, you know, and sort of trying to look at what is the possibility of this thing called so-called art that you have at hand. And I mean, for me at least, it was also about you know, like you spoke about representation. I mean, for me, I'm constantly trying to grapple with representation, like what is art and what is this object and where does it stand? Or so one is constantly, because there is this sense of deception that the city or you know, there's several sense of questioning or deception that you know that you're sort of aware of the mediation that is taking place. So what is reality is constantly something that you are grappling with. And perhaps the 90s exaggerated it for us, but then to think back of it, I could also feel representation and reality could also be a question which many people across even 200 years ago would want to, you know, it's a thing which art, science, you know, poetry, they're constantly dealing with the immediate versus the internal, the external. So, well, you know, so to keep that, while the 90s are there, and then there's also the rest of the tendencies and the questions that we all share.
But the 90s heightened in that sense.
Of course.
So it's like a vortex where.
Exactly. It just stretches it out, that momentarily, because there was a significant, now looking back, a shift in practices in the 90s versus the 80s. But then there was also the 60s and 70s, which had their own urgencies. Yeah.
Shilpa, could you also conclude by speaking a bit specifically about the work that you have downstairs?
Well, the work is, it says I look at things and you open it up with eyes different from yours. And pretty much like, well, going back to what one said is that you're constantly meeting somebody who's perhaps coming from a place elsewhere, but also looking at, you're looking at yourself, you know, the person you're looking. So it's also this aspect of the limitation of knowing, this doubt in what we might hold on to or we might remember or register, or also, as psychologists say, a large part of what we do in terms of our actions need not actually be processed by our active memory, but it comes from the unconscious space, which is also a space that we are not constantly in touch with. So there's also this, so it's about this doubt of knowing, you know. A psychologist would say that 90% of our actions come from the unconscious, which is, you know, a lot. And to think that what are we doing and what am I saying right now? And but so this work looks at this relationship, this very fraught, fragile, in flux relationship with the act of knowledge, with the act of knowing. So that's what,
Shreyas, to you, if I could extend the same questions in the shape and emergence of your practice, also sort of being located in what we sort of say as the suburbs, but they are right in the middle of its own city in many ways, but also the specific kind of work where there is bringing back a sense of the object design histories, but as there is also a history of sort of shifting the object, dislocating the object, or sort of moving it from its place of production or its use in a certain way. So if you could expand on both these aspects.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about the idea of the television set, and it's a very interesting example. I mean, there are certain given realities. One is the reality of something that has been filmed, which is a given reality. The second one is the one which has been watched. And then if you look at this as a postcard of a person watching a television set, that's the third reality. So for me, it's interesting that how politics plays part in all these kind of given realities and how these sections perform with or against each other. And if I look at myself holding that postcard and looking at it, then there's another fourth dimension that is added to it. So I like to look at the given situation in that manner, because many a time this question arises that how do we look at, like when Shilpa spoke about the way the given state, the politics of it plays a role, an immediate role in her work, and also when we heard about what was happening in Germany and how times were changing. I feel at the same time there are two forces that act in the same manner. There's a given external force that is put onto you, but at the same time, you as an individual are also leading a daily life. I mean, you are getting up every morning, you're brushing your teeth, you are going for a bath, still consciously or subconsciously thinking about the given world situation that empires are coming down and problem with capitalism and how, but you are not so conscious about it. You're not conscious about it until it hits you in the face. So for me, it's interesting that how any given life or any given object can keep going in this kind of a situation. So for me, I'm looking at the same situation from the inside to the outside. So there is a subtle science of the political language that plays a part in the work. If I look at this particular work, it does also answer the question of what is public and private, because it looks at the idea of the domestic, and it looks at the idea of whether the domestic can be archived. And if it is archived,